Hello and welcome to number 7 in my series on well-being, in which we're going through the 10 keys to happiness. Today we're on the letter R from the word dream, and that's going to stand for resilience. Now all of us have times of stress, of loss, of failure, of trauma or bereavement in our lives, and we've all come face to face with that even more in this past year. But how we respond to things like this has a big impact on our well-being. We obviously can't choose what happens to us, but the greater our resilience, the more likely we are to be able to cope with life's challenges. In the book The Resilience Factor by Rivich and Chattet, they say this: resilience comes from the Latin word resilio, to jump back, and is increasingly used in everyday language to describe our ability to cope with and bounce back from adversity. Some people describe it as the ability to bend instead of breaking when under pressure or difficulty, or the ability to persevere and adapt when faced with challenge. Now, resilience like this isn't a gift that some people are just lucky enough to have while others don't. It's something that we can all develop. And it's influenced by 3 sets of factors. Now, the first factor might mean that for some of us, the ship has sailed, because the first factor is actually about our development as children and teenagers. So for those of us who are adults, that's gone in a sense, hasn't it? But for those of you who might be listening who are parents or grandparents or carers of children, that's worth hearing, and you might want to find out a little bit more about to help children and teenagers to develop resilience. But the second and third factors are things that we can all work on. Let's start with the second set of factors first. I can't go through all of them now because we don't have the time in a short thought for the day, but two of the things in those second set of factors include our having good relationships and faith. Hear that your Christian faith can help you with resilience, as can your relationships with others. And for more on that particular one, go back to the thought that I did on relating towards the beginning of this series. But for now, let's just think a bit about our faith. How often do you read the Psalms? Many of the Psalms are known as Psalms of lament, and they're written when the psalmist is going through suffering and trauma. And what we often hear in these Psalms of lament is the psalmist pouring out his pain to God. He doesn't hold back. He is completely real. And as we read, we're reminded, as the psalmist knew, that we're not on our own in our pain and suffering. We have a God who is there for us, who is ready for us to turn to him and to be real with him as we share our vulnerability. And we also have a God, and of course Psalm 23 reminds us of this, who promises to walk through the valley of the shadow of death with us, to journey with us in our struggle, at the same time as assuring us of a sure and certain hope. And we see that modelled, of course, in the Easter story, so apposite at this time of year. Then, of course, there's the Apostle Paul, and he talks often about the need to persevere in times of struggle, but to persevere with our eyes set on the hope that we have in Jesus. It's almost impossible to persevere if we don't have hope. Do you know the hope that is yours in Christ? The hope that promises that one day all will be well, that life does come out of death, that joy does come out of despair. Do you know that hope? Do you know a God God who walks beside you and encourages you and weeps with you? Are you able to put your trust in that God? Because that is part of what helps you to develop resilience. But alongside those external factors of relationship and faith, there are also some internal factors, and those are the third set of factors that are talked about in terms of building resilience. I want to just think of one of those for now, for today, and that particular one is about how we choose to interpret events. Going back to our faith for a moment, when we think about that one, the Apostle Paul reminds us in Romans 8:28 that in all things God works for the good of those who love him. So let me ask you a question. How do you view pain and suffering? Whilst we're in the midst of suffering, it can of course be so hard to see what good might come out of it. But developing an attitude in which we're able to begin to reflect and try to find and notice some of the good that might come out of our struggle can help build resilience. Let's be real here, however. There are some traumas in our lives when we simply don't have the resilience to weather them. That doesn't mean we have failed. It is never wrong to admit when we're struggling and to ask for help from friends and, when necessary, from professionals. Please don't ever hesitate to do that, knowing always that you're loved and valuable, not for how well you're coping with the situation, but for who you are, a beloved child of God. But let's consider too how we might build on some of these things I've talked about today. How we might increase our resilience by developing good relationships both with ourselves and with God, as well as reflecting on and placing our hope and trust in a God who promises to bring good out of all things. And of course, all the other things I've previously talked about in this series and yet have to address all help too to build up our resilience. But they all require us to take action, to work on it. Sadly, resilience doesn't come about by magic.